Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time watching, my name is Hannah. So as some of you know, or maybe do not know, I am a convert to Islam or a revert to Islam. I've been getting a lot of questions about why I converted, when I converted, and just general questions around that experience. So I thought today I would make a video talking about my story and how I came to Islam and converted. So as I sat down to make this video, I realized that I have never actually told this story before. It's not something that I really talked about before, so hopefully this story isn't too all over the place and it makes sense, and it kind of is just a succession of a lot of events in my life that have happened over the course of a few years that led me to where I am now. So I'm kind of just going to try to go through that. I just wanted to make it clear that in this video, I'm definitely not trying to bash any other religions or faiths or be negative about them. This is solely just my experience and kind of what happened with me. So of course, I'm not trying to put down anyone else's way of life or religion. I have a lot of respect for people of all faiths. So let's get into the video. So to start, for my background, I grew up in the US and my parents raised us Catholic, and they were pretty religious and strict with us growing up on the faith. So being Catholic was a big part of my identity and my upbringing. So, we would go to church every Sunday. We would pray the rosary as a family all the time. We would be praying before dinner, before school in the morning. It was pretty central to my childhood, especially growing up. My sisters went to Catholic school, but I did not, so I never had that experience, but regardless, it was still pretty influential in my upbringing. So as a child, I always believed in God. I always believed that there was like a higher power, and I would pray to God and have a relationship with him. But as I got older, things kind of started to change, and I feel like with a lot of people, that's kind of what happens. I kind of had a lot of doubts about the faith, about Catholicism in general. So as I got older, I definitely started to struggle with the teachings of Catholicism and the Bible. There were a lot of things that just didn't make sense to me, and when I would ask questions, I never really got an answer. I would just get like, oh, that's just how it is, or that's just kind of, you just have to believe. And I didn't really buy that. I didn't like just having to believe in something blindly without fully understanding it or believing it. And I always viewed God as kind of like scary. Like there was always a fear. And I think there should be like a healthy fear of God, of course. I think Catholicism kind of teaches like, if you don't do this, you're going to hell. Do this or you're going to hell, or you're never going to be forgiven. So that was something that I struggled with. I always had like a fear of God rather than viewing God as the most loving, the most forgiving, the most merciful, like I should have. I also struggled with the fact that the Bible had been changed a lot, and a lot of the stories in there just didn't make sense to me. So there was just an accumulation of things that just I didn't believe in, and I couldn't just accept the fact that I needed to believe in them blindly without having any proof. And I think living in the US, a lot of people aren't really religious, and religion isn't something that's talked about a lot. So as a child and when I was growing up, religion wasn't something that I really talked about with people outside of church. It wasn't like seen as cool, I guess, to be talking about God or talking about religion or faith. So it wasn't really a central part of my life. As I got older, it became kind of something where I went to church, I prayed on Sundays, and that was it. I didn't bring God throughout every day of the week. I didn't really make him a central part of my life. And as I got older, I kind of stopped wanting to go to church and stopped wanting to participate, just because when you don't have that foundation of belief, it's hard to want to enter into the religion. As I got older, I just felt like I was going to church because of my parents. It wasn't because that I believed in it. It was because that's what my parents believed in. That was what I was raised. So that's kind of what I have to do. That's like the way it is. So as I got older, I definitely moved more away from God. I didn't really feel connected to the faith. I didn't feel connected to the religion. So I moved away from church, and I moved away from Catholicism in general. And this was about the time when I was starting college. So as with a lot of people, you're kind of trying to branch out and learn more about the world, kind of trying to seek out more knowledge. And I was trying to find myself And it was at a point in my life where I felt really like directionless and at times like hopeless, and I felt like I needed some structure in my life. And I ended up kind of missing going to church and having that like feeling of tradition and consistency because it was familiar to me. So I tried going to Catholic church again and it just didn't really make sense to me. So I decided to look into going to a non-denominational Christian church. So I would go on Sundays to the non-denominational Christian church, and that was so different from anything I had ever experienced. It was like the polar opposite of what Catholicism was. Very different, and I had never really seen outside of what Catholicism was. So it was like a kind of like a shock to me. So like it was a lot of singing and music, and they had like a screen that had the music lyrics, so it felt kind of like karaoke. The pastor would always give really good sermons and you would leave there feeling really good. But I remember always leaving and like feeling like that didn't feel like church to me. It didn't feel like religion, and I felt like I wanted more out of it. So like, yes, I would always feel really good, and like the pastor would always make the sermons really relatable, and I didn't feel that fear of God like I did in Catholicism. But regardless, I didn't really like the experience, and I felt like I missed that tradition and that like structure of Catholicism. So at that point I felt pretty confused because I felt like, okay, well, if Catholicism doesn't make sense to me, non-denominational Christianity doesn't make sense to me, then there's nothing. At that point, the thought of looking into other religions, it wasn't anything I ever thought I could do, and I had never really been exposed to other religions other than Christianity because that's not really taught in public school, and that's not something that I really sought out. And obviously being raised Catholic, you kind of just learn that one way. So I hadn't really been exposed to anything other than Christianity. It was all I knew. So I would never have even thought that I could look outside of Christianity because it was part of who I was. So I kind of became kind of upset and just like kind of resentful at the faith in general, and just thinking like, okay, well, if this doesn't make sense to me, then I guess I am not going to be a religious person. I'm not going to have faith because I don't believe in any of this. And even though I believed in God, I couldn't find that connection. I couldn't find a religion that made sense to me. So that was definitely a difficult period in my life where I felt like kind of directionless and I didn't know kind of what to do. So as I mentioned, at this point I was in college, and this is where me and Hassan met, who is my husband now. So the area that I grew up in and still live in now is pretty majority Christian, and there's a very small minority Muslim population. And Hassan was actually one of the first Muslims that I think I ever met. And it wasn't something that I ever really thought much about. It was just interesting that I had never really met a Muslim or been exposed to what they believed in, just because, like I said, I was kind of ignorant to what other faiths kind of believed because I had never sought out that information. So it even seems like so ignorant to say now, but I didn't even know that Muslims and Christians believed in the same God. Like, that's how much I just didn't know about the religion. So it was interesting as I got to know him more and got to know more about his religion. Like, I had a lot of questions and I was really curious about it, but obviously at that point I had never considered the fact that I could be Muslim. And of course in the media, the way that Muslims are portrayed and the way the Middle East is portrayed, there's just so many stereotypes. So I didn't know other than kind of what the media had told me. So as a few years passed, we were still in college and we decided that we wanted to enter into a relationship. At this point, he kind of explained to me that in Islam and in his culture and religion, that dating isn't really a thing. You don't date, you kind of get the approval of your families, you get engaged, and you get married. So this was kind of scary for me because we were really young and I had never thought that I would get married at such a young age. To start dating someone that you hardly know, let alone becoming engaged to someone you don't know, is a huge step. So I was like pretty scared at first, and I was like, well, I don't know if that's even something that I can do. Like, it just felt like a big step for me. So I was kind of initially nervous about that. And before that, we had a lot of conversations about God and religion, and I had a lot of questions about Islam, and I had asked him a lot, but he couldn't always answer the questions at least to the extent that I wanted them answered. But at that point, becoming Muslim, again, wasn't a thought because I knew that in Islamic tradition, Muslim men are able to marry Christian and Jewish women since they're part of the same Abrahamic tradition. So I never saw myself converting because I knew that it was permissible for us to be together if we wanted to be and if our families approved. So at that point, again, being Christian and Catholic was part of my upbringing and identity. Even if I didn't resonate with the faith, it was still part of who I was, and I didn't want to change that about myself, especially just to get married. So as time passed, we made the intention to get married after we graduated from college. In the summer after my junior year of college, I actually took a trip to the Middle East in Jordan, and that trip was really influential for me in my life and also in my conversion to Islam. So I was selected to participate in a 2-week international workshop in Amman, Jordan. And there I worked with other American students and Palestinian students. And we were learning about youth civic engagement in both of our regions and kind of how youth participate in the civic communities. I went on that trip not really knowing what to expect. This was my first time going outside of the US other than to Canada. And I was so excited to be kind of immersed in another country, in another culture, and kind of have the opportunity to travel outside of where I've lived my whole life. So I went into the trip super excited to meet new people and to learn new things and kind of just be immersed in another culture for a couple weeks. So the entire experience was very short. It was only a couple weeks, but it was honestly a really influential trip, and it was really influential in my life. And while I was there, I definitely got exposed to Islam even more. So because it is a Muslim majority country, I kind of got the opportunity to see what Islam is like in the Middle East and meet Muslim people, Muslim women, hear the adhan every day, 5 times a day. Hearing the adhan every day was something that was so beautiful, even though I couldn't understand it because it was in Arabic. It was just so interesting, and you just get this like sense of serenity come over you when you hear it. And people literally just stop in the street and start praying when they hear it. So it just felt really interesting to go there because, as I mentioned before, growing up in the US, people really aren't religious here, at least outwardly. But going to a Middle Eastern Muslim majority country, it was really interesting to see how people there value religion so much more and are very outward with the expression of their faith. And there's no like fear, there's no embarrassment about that. It's okay to be religious there, whereas in the US, it's kind of looked down upon to be religious, at least outwardly. So while we were there, some of the Muslims wanted to go to Jummah or Friday prayer one of the days, and some of the American students wanted to kind of go to see what it was like. So we went to the mosque, and it was my first time ever going to a mosque or even really seeing one. In the US, at least where I live, like I said, there's a very small Muslim population, so we don't have any like traditional style mosques. They're just kind of like in a strip mall or in like the basement of a church. So there's not really like the beautiful traditional architecture mosques that are all over the Middle East. So it was so nice to just be able to go to a mosque like that and just see the beauty of it. And I really didn't know what to expect going in there for the Friday prayer. Even though I couldn't understand anything and it was in Arabic, it was still a really cool and surreal experience for me because it was unlike anything that I had ever done. We actually ended up praying with them too for the salah or the prayer after the khutbah. And so I just remember like being next to them and trying to copy what they were doing and trying to make sure that I do all the movements correctly. And again, even though I didn't know what any of the recitations meant, it was just beautiful. It felt like such a surreal experience for me. And especially being in sujood or prostration, that was kind of when I just felt a feeling of like peace and serenity come over me. And I realized like, oh my gosh, like I felt so connected to God in that moment, more than I had ever felt before. And especially at a time in my life where I felt like I didn't belong to any religion or any faith, I felt like a feeling of peace wash over me. I felt like I was doing the right thing. And just the physicality of the prayer was really beautiful to me, and how in Islam in general, you really physically prostrate towards God when you pray. It's unlike anything I had been used to, because as a Christian or a Catholic, I was just kind of used to praying, you know, sitting down or at the dinner table. It didn't really have any physicality to it. So after I got back from Jordan, I got a copy of the Quran and I wanted to read it. But at this point, I was still kind of in denial, even though I had that experience in the mosque and I was able to learn more about the faith directly from people in that country. I was still kind of hesitant, and I was like, no, there's no way I can convert to Islam. Like, I read the Quran almost trying to like prove to myself that I couldn't be Muslim and that this wasn't a faith that I wanted to adhere to. So I read it kind of trying to find something that I didn't agree with or that I didn't believe in. But as I read it, I realized like I had a hard time finding something that I didn't like or that I didn't believe in, which was definitely interesting to me because I really didn't think that I could be Muslim at this point, and it just wasn't even a thought. So I would just read the Quran, try to learn more, and just try to see like the core of the beliefs and from the direct source, because all I had learned before was just kind of word of mouth and in conversations I had had with Hassan or with the Muslims in Jordan. So I hadn't really taken the time to sit down with the Quran and read the word of God directly. So that was definitely an interesting experience for me. At the same time, I would be trying to like learn as much as I could online and watch all these like interfaith discussions. And I kept finding like 9 times out of 10, watching those interfaith discussions, I would agree more with the Muslim imam or scholar, more so than I would with like the priest or pastor who was representing Christianity. During this whole process of trying to learn more, I didn't really tell anybody other than Hassan, because religion isn't really something that I talked about with the people in my life. Even my family, like they had known that I had moved away from Christianity, and I wasn't like a religious person, you know what I mean? So it wasn't something that I usually talked about with my family or friends. And Hassan really tried not to interfere with the process of me learning, which I do appreciate, because I feel like he wanted me to learn for myself without kind of him putting his own perspective or cultural tradition or understanding on it. So I kind of got to learn on my own, which was kind of overwhelming at first because there's so much information out there and it's hard to know what is true. But I did feel like I was able to have my own personal experience with learning about the religion rather than kind of learning through someone else. So at this point in my life, even though I wasn't saying that I was Muslim and I still was in denial about the fact that I believed in a lot of the teachings, I was trying to make a lot of transitions in my life. Something that I really liked about Jordan was the fact that everyone dressed really modestly there. And before we went on the trip, we got like an email from the coordinator, and they said like, make sure that you only bring really modest clothes, make sure that you're like completely covered when you go there, and which was obviously fine with me. I really learned the value of modesty and appreciated that the woman there dressed really modestly. And I feel like in the West, or the US or the West in general, like fashion and trends are so like highly regarded, and you're supposed to kind of just wear what everyone else is wearing, even if it's not modest. And I feel like the fashion in the US is just kind of like, how little can you get away with wearing? And it's just like, I was kind of sick of that, especially after seeing what it was like in Jordan and how like beautiful modesty actually was. I was just kind of like, I don't want to like fall in this trap anymore and dress like this anymore. So I kind of started trying to transition my wardrobe to be more modest. And so I was changing the way I was dressing, and like in subtle ways, I was also changing the way I was acting. And at this point also, I was cutting out a lot of people in my life and a lot of people that I was friends with. And although this was pretty difficult for me because it was a period in my life where I felt really lonely, I felt like a lot of people in my life just wouldn't understand, and also just wouldn't maybe keep me on the right path that I was seeing my life going. So I kind of didn't want to explain myself to these people, and obviously these people knew me as someone who was never really outwardly religious. So to become a completely different person in their eyes and just start being outwardly religious probably would have shocked them. And I just didn't want to go through the process of having to explain myself because I didn't feel like I had to. And I also felt like these people might not keep me on the best path towards where I saw my life going. So at this point, I really was cutting out a lot of people and a lot of friends that I had. So as I said, this was a pretty lonely time for me, and it was really confusing for me because I felt like I couldn't tell anybody. I had no one to talk to about it. But I really thought that this was the truth. After I read the Quran, I realized like, I believe in this. Like, this is kind of what I believe in. And even though I felt at the time like I couldn't convert, I really felt like this was the truth and this was a religion that I could adhere to. So at this point, I was still living with my family and I was really nervous about them finding out. I wanted to try to pray again, kind of to see if I still felt that like closeness with God as I did when I was praying in Jordan for the Jummah prayer. So I like typed up this little like prayer guide for myself, and like I would be praying like at all crazy hours of the night in the dark and just hoping that my family like wouldn't walk in and see me praying. But I just remember still like being in sujood, the feeling of closeness with God that I experienced was unlike anything I had ever felt before. And growing up, I always believed in God, but I just had kind of like ups and downs with my relationship with him. But the feeling that I felt when I was praying, reading Quran, learning more about the faith, it felt right. It felt like a religion that I wanted to be a part of. I felt so close to God, like I had never felt in my life. So just being able to pray was really impactful for me as well. This was around the same time last year and Ramadan was coming up. Hassan asked me if I wanted to try fasting since it was one of the pillars of the faith, and he knew that I was becoming more and more interested in converting. So he said like, okay, why don't you try fasting? And initially I was really nervous and I was like, okay, like I'll fast, but I'll still drink water. And he was like, okay, well, that's not really fasting then. So eventually I did try fasting, and I didn't do it for the whole month of Ramadan, but I did it for a few weeks. And this was like finally it for me. I was like, okay, like I've read the Quran, I've learned how to pray, I've fasted for Ramadan, like I know all there is to know. I was like, this is it, like I want to convert. The process of fasting was really impactful for me, and I felt a spiritual connection with God, and I was able to cut out a lot of the bad habits in my life and really just solely focus on God. And I felt like I was really connected with the global Muslim community. After Ramadan, I was like, okay, like I think this is it. Like I want to convert, I want to take my shahada. And honestly, I do wish I did it earlier because I do feel like I waited a long time, just because of my fear of kind of what other people would think. And that's still something that I feel to this day, but I do wish that I had converted sooner because I feel like I definitely waited a long time, but I know it is a big life transition and it was a big change, but I wish I would have converted kind of the moment I realized that this was what I wanted to believe in. So at this point, I knew I needed to tell my parents before I took my shahada because obviously I was living with them and this was a big part of my life, and having their kind of approval did mean a lot to me. So I did kind of tell them and explain to them like my reasoning, and kind of explained like, okay, like I've done a lot of research, like I know what it's about. And honestly, alhamdulillah, they were very understanding. They did have a lot of questions for me, and they wanted to make sure that it wasn't like pressure from Hassan or anything like that that was leading me to convert. And I kind of just assured them that no, this was my own decision that I came to on my own. And alhamdulillah, they were very supportive, and that honestly is something I'm so grateful for, because I know a lot of Muslim reverts or converts don't have that family support, and I know that can be really, really hard. So that is something that meant a lot to me in my process. It was kind of like a sigh of relief, like a weight off my shoulders to know like, okay, even though I don't have like support from my friends or extended family, like I have it from my parents, and that's kind of what mattered to me. So at this point, I was kind of trying to find a masjid to do my shahada at, and I was really nervous because I didn't want to do it in front of a group of people. And I know like a lot of masjids really want to kind of not like put new converts like on display, but they really are like proud and really want them to do it like in front of everybody after like a Jummah prayer. And that was not what I wanted at all. I wanted to do something like really private and just like have me and the imam and maybe a few other people. because I'm like really shy and I didn't really feel secure yet in converting. So be in front of that many people just felt really like intimidating. So I had to reach out to like 5 different mosques in the vicinity of where I live. Finally, I found a mosque that would kind of just have like a private meeting with the imam and a few other people. So it was really nice. It was really like emotional for me because I did feel like, not like a new person, but I felt like it was kind of like I was finally entering into the next chapter of my life. And it was like official now that, yes, I've been believing in these and practicing the faith for a few months now, but now it was like official, like I was officially a Muslim. And I remember the imam like gave me a copy of the Quran and like talked to me about learning how to pray and reading the Quran. He was just kind of emphasizing like, you know, take it slow, like day by day. And at that point I was like, I already know how to pray and I've already read the Quran. But so it has been a transition like anything, but this is a huge life change. And as the imam said, it's really something that's kind of come gradually, and I've been able to kind of incorporate different changes in my life gradually and slowly without changing overnight, because obviously that's not possible, and I'm still learning every day, learning more about the religion. There's so much to learn. It's probably going to be a lifelong process. So that kind of sums up my story. It's been about a little over 6 months since I took my shahada at the masjid, which seems crazy because I can't believe that much time has passed. So I feel like this video is definitely really long, but I was trying to kind of go through every detail and every reason for kind of what led me to convert. And so ultimately, I guess I felt like Islam kind of resonated with me more than Christianity, and I felt much closer to God in the Islamic religion than I did in Catholicism. And though I always believed in God growing up and I always had a foundation of faith, I never really felt part of a community and I never really felt connected with Catholicism. So to find Islam and to really find a community that I feel a part of and that I can resonate with really has been amazing for me. And I do feel like I have changed a lot since converting to Islam. I do feel like not a new person per se, but I do feel like completely different than the person I was before. And I feel like as a Muslim, I'm constantly trying to better myself. And obviously I'm not perfect, but every day I'm just trying to kind of work on myself and get better as a Muslim and as a person. And I feel like in Islam, just knowing that there's so much more than just this life and this dunya has really helped me as well. I used to really stress a lot about my future and about the world and all of these like worldly things, but I feel like since converting, honestly, alhamdulillah, I feel such a sense of peace and weight lifted off my shoulder, because I know that God truly is the best of planners and there's so much more to this life, and I have like the hereafter to look forward to, and I'm always just kind of looking forward towards that. So I try not to get caught up in the day-to-day struggles or challenges as much as I used to. And honestly, the feeling of peace that I have now is just so much more than what I had before. And I do feel like converting to Islam was honestly one of the best decisions I've ever made. And honestly, alhamdulillah for that. So I'm hoping that this video wasn't too long. I hope that it was able to answer your questions and kind of clear up any curiosity that any of you had about why I converted to Islam and the reasons behind that. I can definitely make more videos like this and kind of talk about how I told my parents and kind of how I incorporated these changes in my life, the struggles I've faced as a convert or a revert to Islam. So definitely let me know if that's something that you'd want to see. So as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.